Today, we're having a necessary and hard conversation when it comes to reimagining success, the intersection of eating disorders and perfectionism. Content warning: this episode includes discussion of eating disorders, other mental health issues, including suicide. Please give yourself the care that you need while listening. Eating disorders are medically serious and deadly. One person dies every 52 minutes in the US as a direct consequence of an eating disorder. Eating disorders affect about 1 in 11 Americans over a lifetime, which translates roughly to 30 million people. They're also strongly associated with perfectionism, particularly the self-critical kind that makes mistakes feel unbearable. And for high achievers, these disorders can be especially easy to miss because they often hide behind competence, discipline, and success. My guest expert today, Dr. Jillian Rigert, a decorated high achiever, will share her personal struggles and give you actionable insights for understanding this hidden and often misunderstood issue. So listen in. Welcome to Success Reimagined. I am Dr. Amna Shabir, your host on this journey to thrive at the intersection of ambition and wellness. In every episode, I'll help you challenge outdated definitions of success, discover practical tools and strategies for growth without compromising your well-being. I am so glad you've joined me. Let's reimagine what's possible together. Dr. Jillian Rigert is a Martha Beck Wayfinder master coach and trauma-informed professional coach who partners with high achievers navigating life and career transitions. She has had an expansive career, holding degrees in dentistry and medicine with a specialty in oral medicine and head and neck cancer. She's also an Air Force veteran. Jillian is currently completing a master's degree in marriage and family therapy with focus in trauma and is an advocate for approaching holistic well-being through a systemic biopsychosocial and spiritual lens. Welcome to the podcast, Jillian.
It is so great to be here, Amna. I'm so honored.
So you are incredible, and today's conversation is going to be very rich. I want you to please take us behind the scenes of your life's journey through the lens of perfectionism.
Well, perfectionism is something that I certainly used to wear as a badge of honor. I can remember myself being quite a perfectionist when I was in elementary school, and I really valued the praise that afforded me. And then when we recognized something's working, we doubled down on it. So perfectionism continued with me as that badge of honor, something that I thought was really great, on to undergrad and then dental school. And where I recognize in retrospect it started to inhibit me and hold me back is when I joined the Air Force. And the Air Force was a new environment for me. It was something where the people who were in officer training alongside me may have grown up with families that were in the military. So they knew more about the military. They were further along than I was. We had to take tests and I didn't ace them with 100%. And I started to make that mean a lot about me. I wasn't good enough and I loved the military. It was something that it was really important for me to be in. But I remember how I was starting to feel like I was losing my identity because no longer was I one of the best of whatever I was doing. And the Air Force, I had selected me. I was really passionate about becoming an oral maxillofacial surgeon at that time, some of that ego driven. And I'm still trying to distinguish if it was mostly ego driven or if there were elements that I really wanted to do. That will be part of our story about what happened with my oral surgery career. But I did get into oral surgery. The Air Force sponsored me to go to a 6-year program. So for people that don't know, oral surgery can be 4-year track where you complete the residency, but you don't complete medical school, or a 6-year track where you complete residency and integrated, you complete a medical school portion. So the Air Force only had 4-year programs, so they sponsored me to go to a civilian program. So I get to the civilian program, and even during the interviews, I had seen people from Ivy League schools, and I'm really having all these self-doubts. But things like imposter syndrome, the normalization of those feelings wasn't mainstream at the time, so I thought it was just me. And I believed that I was never going to measure up. I kept comparing myself to the attending who was near retirement. I'm like, I don't think I'll ever be as passionate as he is about this or as skilled. And so it just fueled all of these self-doubts and this existential crisis. And I cascaded and I just didn't think I could do anything. And I numbed that pain by not eating, which we'll need to talk more about kind of how people can start to recognize when perfectionism is no longer serving them. But that's the shift. It's like the perfectionism got me to where I was trying to go. Air Force, oral surgery resident, you got to be top of your class to get into those type of things. I wasn't very number one in my class, but I was in the top. And so perfectionism got me to where I want to go. And then it started to inhibit me to a point that I nearly lost my life, which will be part of our discussion today.
Just want to hold space for what you've shared. And for our audience members, Jillian or Dr. Rigert she's a physician, she's a surgeon, she's a dentist. She's now going to become a therapist. Like we're talking to somebody who's an alpha high achiever in all domains in talking about something extremely serious and painful. So let's pause here, Jillian, and take us to those moments where I would say like a lot of these shifts happened. These were the pivotal moments which led to crossroads in your life, taking you from where you started in the military and now you're here with us.
hmm Those pivotal moments, it's really that comparison and never feeling so that never feeling enough. So when it comes to perfectionism, I love Brene Brown's work. It kind of illuminated it in a way that really resonated with me. And she says, if we're always striving to be perfect, and so we'll never get to that area of achievement of perfection. And so if we always think we need to be a certain way, that's actually unattainable. And then we have often a negative self-perception of where we are. So even if we recognize we're achieving a lot, we are still not where we think we need to be. So in the gap of where we are and where we think we need to be, Brene Brown talks about that experience of shame. We feel shame, and what that sounds like often is I'm never enough. So I was constantly in this state of shame, and it became exhausting. There came a point where I just felt like no matter what I did, it was never going to be enough. And why it came when I was an Air Force oral surgeon is because I held on to this belief that that's when I would feel enough. I got into the Air Force, which was, again, a huge passion of mine. I was very excited to be in the military. It was such an honor for me. And I got into oral surgery at one of my top ranked programs, a wonderful program. Okay, so then why am I so empty? And it was at that moment that I was like, okay, this pain that I'm experiencing inside, it's not going to go away by the solutions that I was chasing, which is the achievements. Once I reached this top of the mountain, which I perceived, okay, that's when it was going to be, again, Air Force, oral surgery, and that relief didn't come, that's when I started to get an existential crisis. And I felt it was never going to end. This pain was never going to end. And when I thought that pain was never going to end, that's when I became suicidal. And that's when perfectionism clearly was no longer serving me well.
Take us to that moment. And it's so painful, right? When we are talking about that, you explained it so elegantly, the benchmark of where you are,
hmm
where you want to be, or are socially expected to be as well. The perfectionism is so layered, and that space in the middle of shame.
hmm
And for you, it took this really dark turn.
hmm
What happened then?
Yeah, well, so for officer training in the military, you don't get a lot of sleep. So that's when I was starting to feel like you have the feelings of never being enoughness. Then it's paired with this sleeplessness. And I was noticing that my mind was kind of going dark. And I was like, okay, what the heck is going on? I was really fantasizing. There were different specialties that were in the officer training with me. And I started to fantasizing what would life be like if I came in as there were psychologists there. And I remember thinking, God, I wish I was them. Because the reason why I thought about that at the time, one, I had wanted to become a therapist when I was in undergrad, and I chose a different path because it wasn't supported by my family member whose opinion meant a lot to me when it came to my career at the time. And so I knew I was interested in psychology and things like that. So when I was in officer training alongside psychologists and I was feeling so exhausted and having all that pain of never enough, I imagined my life, okay, well, if I'm going to become this surgeon, I'm going to be constantly stressed, constantly exhausted. So I started thinking that their life was going to be a lot better because maybe their life, the therapist could sleep a little bit more than surgeon just based off of what I knew about it. So that's when I remember just fantasizing and questioning my life choices and wishing I had chose a different path. But because I had committed to the Air Force and I committed to that track, I thought I was trapped in it and that I would rather continue that than face the shame and the disappointment of saying, never mind, I would love to pivot. So I didn't speak up about my doubts at that time, largely because I didn't want to disappoint. And our society puts a lot of meaning into quitting. So, suck it up, keep going. And I still had, at that officer training, still had held on to the belief that once I became a surgeon, I would feel better about myself. And then I kept going in the military, and we'll just fast forward to my residency at UNC, where these thoughts became very real, very persistent. When I had the responsibility of the intern, I wasn't sleeping, I was having all of these self-doubts. Then I got placed at one rotation with an attending whose leadership style very much was shame-based and didn't help me. I won't blame her for what I was experiencing. However, if we are feeling shame inside, we are feeling we're not enough, and we have someone that comes at us that's critical, relentlessly judgmental, doesn't feel psychologically safe, it feeds into our insecurities. So I didn't have the self-love, the self-compassion, which people, if they know me now, I'm huge on, because that would have saved my suffering it would have reduced my suffering then and can save so many of our lives. But because I believed the words she was saying about me and the way that she was talking to me fueled my own high self-criticism inside, it made me feel like, you're right, I'm never enough. I'll never be enough. I'm a burden. People are better off without me. Why don't I just end this now? So those thoughts started to get louder and louder, more pervasive, more pervasive. And then that sleeplessness, I was just so exhausted. So you've got this state of sleeplessness that it's hard to think clearly at all. And then I was just that forced sleeplessness added that extra layer of psych ache, and I just wanted it all to end. And in surgery, we have access to a lot of ways to end our life. So when I was on my rotation for anesthesia, I provide anesthesia for people. I'm not going to go into details because I know I know it's not the best thing, but we'll just say I had access to a lot of ways that I could have ended it all. And it took one person to share a story with me. It was a surgical attending woman who talked to me about her own experiences, who normalized what I was experiencing just enough for me to step back and see it in a perspective. Maybe this isn't just me. That I called and I asked for help. And I said, I think I need to take a medical leave. And the program manager from the Air Force said, when? And I said, probably several months ago, but best next time is now. I explained what I was experiencing. And fortunately, he was very compassionate, understanding, and facilitated a medical leave for me at that time.
Thank you for your courage in sharing that with us, Jillian. Like I cannot, and I'm so grateful for the person who created that space by modeling their humanity for you to be able to ask for help. Where in this picture in journey did eating disorders come in?
So anorexia became a way to numb myself of the pain of the psychic. And it wasn't like I said, oh, I'm going to stop eating or reduce my eating and run more to reduce some of the psychic. It was for me biologically, probably. I just realized those things were helping me, just like numbing. So overwork was a numbing agent at that time. People might get into different types of addiction. They might numb from substances, social media. There's so many ways we can numb. So when I was feeling suicidal and having these thoughts that I'd rather not live, so one, I lost my appetite like that. Went straight to my gut. And when I was not having an appetite, I didn't want to eat, and not eating for me calms me down. So some people, there's all these theories about kind of the biology of and the neurobiology about who is more susceptible to anorexia. And some of it's like, well, that not eating, that restriction, it's kind of euphoric and it numbs the pain. It supports you in pain relief for some people. For some people, it doesn't do that. But for me, it did. So I just did what helped me to feel better. And then, in medicine and high achievement, in this culture, we're not often connected in our mind and our body. So I had likely been very dissociated enough that I was doing all this damage to myself. But when I even talk about it, it's like I was an outsider to this person who was starving themselves to death. I can tell you about my experience. I can tell you about the objective data that was presented to me when I was in the hospital. That feels like a story that I'm telling you about a patient's life, which was actually an attending's message to me when I was inpatient. He's like, "You talk about yourself like it's a patient." I'm like, "That's my lived experience of what it feels like to be starving yourself, to know people have fear in their eyes. They think you're going to die." And I was so numb that I was like, I don't know if it's denial, if it was apathy, dissociation. It's just like, yeah, I'm watching this happen to myself. And I don't know if I just don't want to stop it, if I was just so done. I didn't feel fear that I was going to die. So I think part of that was denial, or, I don't know if it was apathy. I will never know for sure what led me to just allow myself to get to a place like, yeah, sure, I may die. And I was actually quite upset that I didn't for many, many years after the military ended up discharging me for getting help because of the shame, the guilt, never feeling enough, failing in terms of that's how I attributed my quitting surgery. That was ultimate failure. That was a burden. So that's how anorexia fit in. It numbed me from the pain, and it just everything cycled into one another. And people, there's such a, even in medicine, a misunderstanding about anorexia. Sure, I have body dysmorphia. Sure, all the things fit when it comes to the like test prompts that were often given about this like adolescent female who does a lot of exercise and gets a stress fracture. Sure, I fit the characteristic features that can be stereotypes around anorexia, and so much of it is just very superficial. The weight-based stuff, it's like so anorexia has a role in people's life, and I'll speak for myself on that. Like the role for me was to numb me from all of the pain, and it did quite a good job of that.
I'm the host and I need to be able to ask the next question, but I just want to take a moment and pause here because just wow. Thank you for taking us like we hear people share their journeys, and as a host I have the privilege of listening to this conversation, and everyone in the audience is has a privilege of listening to this very private experience that you've had, and I would really want to thank you for your courage again for sharing that. Jillian, I want you to educate us on the intersection of eating disorders, body image, perfectionism. You mentioned body dysmorphia. You talked about your personal experience with anorexia.
Mhm,
Especially for the high achievers that are listening,
mhm,
I've never openly really talked about my personal experience. Now you've created some space, so I'll just add a one-liner here. I've struggled with binge eating disorder for a
mm,
very long period of time. I never liked to go with the definition because once you put a label, I was
mhm,
like, oh, well, we're just going to dance around it. That's why I didn't want the label for postpartum depression because like,
mhm,
no, no, don't label me. And I think that I never sought help for that in specific in the postpartum period, a lot of like body dysmorphia that happened with postpartum
mhm,
weight gain and all the things. And I just remember feeling really lost
mhm,
and powerless, and that I just don't want anybody else to find out.
mhm,
And so I dressed it up like I would just, I guess I always tried to make sure that I looked put together so that
mhm.
nobody would find out how lost I was inside.
Yeah.
But yeah, please educate us on all of this.
Well, I mean, you said so many great things there. And even just thinking, so I'll also speak from my lived experiences, and that people's experiences with eating disorders are so different, and we don't hear people's lived experiences because the DSM really does a disservice to so many people living with eating disorders because it creates diagnostic categories and labels that often invalidates people's suffering. And so how that fits into my lived experience is anorexia had BMI criteria. There's a different diagnosis between anorexia and atypical anorexia, which the for me, again, I'll speak from my experience that anorexia can become quite an identity, and anorexia is very competitive. Again, from my perspective, and also from experiences of being in treatment centers, and so you want to be the best anorexic, and I don't use these labels, and I've had to detach from the identity because I realized how much it was killing me to think, okay, so if I'm going to be anorexic, I have to be under this BMI, because if I'm under the BMI that the DSM, they're working to kind of detach the BMI. It's too slow. They needed to never have a BMI criteria for anorexia, but they have it. And so, I knew what this number was, and I had to be at under it by a lot because I didn't want to risk gaining weight to a point that I was no longer under it. So for all of our bodies, they're very different in the way that we are naturally our weight falls culturally, genetically, all those things about everyone's body type's different. So my body type is not meant to be really, really small. I come from a family where power lifters were strong. I loved that about myself. I was, into really explosive sports. And that was a huge part of my identity that actually really has been part of what's saving me because I identify more with the athlete because it predated anorexia. So that part of my brain will compete with the anorexia in a way that actually supports me in doing the things I need to do to stay alive. And for anorexia, when it comes to that perfectionism, it's like, okay, in order to be the best anorexic, I'm going to be as small as possible. Okay, the risks of trying to be the best anorexic as small as possible is death because that perfect thing, when people ask me, well, what's your ideal weight? Like, what is your brain telling you to be? I'm like, 0. It wants me to be invisible and be gone. So I was never going to achieve that weight without dying. And I was, then you'd have shame that you're not that. For me, it would just then feed into the behaviors. And when it came to now, what's been hard for me to talk about anorexia in a body that looks quote unquote healthy or doesn't have it is like people's like, you don't look anorexic and all these things. I'm like, oof, that triggers the brain that's so, just attached to that anorexia and how much pain that can cause people. And to be out on the scene, people didn't hear it, but I'll share my part of what I shared earlier in our conversation before we started the recording. Is I have shared parts of my story with anorexia before. That was too early for me because I had almost died again from anorexia in 2020, 2021 timeframe. And then I weight restored to a point that, I was really uncomfortable in my body and when you weight restore with anorexia, your weight doesn't, it needs time to redistribute. So I came onto the social media scene when I was very uncomfortable in my body, but I hadn't been around people. Again, 2020, 2021, who was around people. This was COVID time. We were all isolating. So during that time, my body was shutting down. I couldn't control my bowels anymore. My heart rate was in the 20s. My white blood cells were 1.63. I was very not well from starvation. Again, I won't include the weight because that can be really problematic. Hopefully the other numbers weren't, but I don't get to share that part of my story that I realized that people didn't know that part. And the fact that they didn't know it is hard for me to reconcile because every day I live with the memories of almost dying in those very lonely times. So by sharing it, Nora, it's like, I get to just really support people in being able to be with me. I guess it's really supporting myself in saying, okay, I share all these messages about why it's important to detach and how I'm reclaiming the narratives from society and all the pressure. Where it comes from is because I sat on my deathbed so many times and I have this deep conviction, but no one was there with me. So I'm like, people saw me when I didn't look very unwell, and I am not going to prove it to them through pictures. I didn't have a lot of pictures, but I also wouldn't, like some people like to share their quote unquote before and after picture. And I understand why they will because they want people to see their suffering, but we can't. Those are invisible suffering. And it would actually invalidate people who have eating disorders where they don't look like they're about to die and they're suffering extraordinary amounts. And so again, it's like that you asked me like how do they all intertwine? And it's that never enoughness again, right? You'll never be small enough. You'll never be, if you have body dysmorphia, you're always wanting to change something. Something always feels like it's not enough. And it's a distraction, meaning that those thoughts, those feelings, those perseverations, something is going on deeper. It's more than what we're focusing on with image. It's more than what we're focusing on with food. It's more than we focus on with movement. It's like, okay, what's underneath all of that? And what role is that eating disorder having in your life to help you cope with whatever else is going on?
Whew. I'm gonna take a pause here. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us in the way that you did. I know that many in the audience, even if they have not directly experienced eating disorders, know somebody who has. And you mentioned the word invisible suffering, and it's like comparative suffering. Am I suffering more than you?
Exactly.
Um, yeah. In social media, I mean, I wrote this. was writing down some notes for myself. You know, the role that it plays in dumbing down our healing journeys, like even for this podcast, right? I don't know how many individuals I have. I am so now grateful to have many loyal listeners from around the world. We're being listened to in 50 plus countries, but many people will just catch clips, right? It's the clip culture now. And
Right.
so I worry because I want to have these deeper, harder conversations. So while I was saying, like, this is so good, I want to share it with everyone. But should I share it in a clip? I want to give appropriate content warning. I want people to engage with this in a meaningful way. And so what I'm noticing with social media and the conversations that we want to have, while it definitely, connected us, it creates a lot of community in its own way, but definitely when we're talking about perfectionism, when we're talking about eating disorders, the way it can be so triggering and the fact that you really don't know.
Uh-huh.
That's why this conversation that we're having and you're sharing your journey, it truly is a privilege for us to listen to this. And we think like, yeah, whatever, like, you're getting to see it, take a back seat and watch what's happening in someone's life behind the scenes. No, it's not whatever.
Mhm.
It really is a privilege.
Well, thank you. And it's a privilege to be here. Honestly, it's like when we think about healing from shame and reclaiming perfectionism, like having a voice that combats perfectionism as being that badge of honor, having your voice out there saying, wait, is this serving us in the way that it's meant to be? Well, that needs to be healed in relationship with people. Like we need to have those discussions. Shame is a relational experience. It thrives in isolation. What I mean by it being a relational experience is we wouldn't feel shame if we weren't meant to be in community. Shame evolutionary has a purpose. Our culture often leverage it in a way that it is toxic shame. So they leverage it in ways that's not really the evolutionary reason why we're supposed to experience shame, which is like kind of course correct so we have a sense of belonging. However, shame-based cultures, especially medicine, high achievement cultures that, they really say, hey, if you didn't get 100%, you're not good enough. They leverage that experience of shame. And so us speaking, combating perfectionism, having compassion, curiosity, non-judgment, and I say, hey, I was feeling very worthless. I was feeling like a failure when I quit surgery. I isolated. It was so embarrassing because I restricted myself so much from nourishment that I couldn't even control my bowels because my body no longer had the structural support to be able to do that. Well, that wasn't going to heal in silence. Like the shame that I carry in that, the way that it starts to heal is being able to share it, but not just share it because you share on social media, then you're at risk for criticism, judgment, all these shame, all these things that can make it worse. So having people like you on who are compassionate, curious, this very safe space you seek to understand with all your heart, that's the type of person that gets to witness this story because that's the type of environment in which these stories will lead to healing and not further shame and perpetuate the problems.
Well, I openly received that, and thank you again. So, Jillian, what do you wish? Like you mentioned that wonderful attending who modeled their humanity and created space for you to actually access help.
Mhm,
What would have been helpful in those moments? And so I want our listeners to hold on to optimism, and I
mhm,
want them to know, like, okay, well, if they're going through something like this,
yeah,
when we're talking about eating disorders and perfectionism, the intersection of these two,
mhm,
what would be helpful for them? And
mhm,
I'm gonna break this down into 2 parts. And for the others that are witnessing and they aren't sure, like, maybe this is what's happening. Often, even well-intentioned humans will offer help in not a great way. So
mhm,
what can the people who are witnessing do to help others? And then
mhm.
what would be helpful for somebody who's going through this experience?
I think, the first thing as helpers, we do want to fix things and take away people's pain. And in that moment, fixing is potentially going to make things worse. Telling them what to do usually makes things worse. Humans don't like to be told what to do. So if you are a witness, you're holding space with that compassion, curiosity, non judgment, attuning to that person, what they are expressing and what they are trying to express that they need. They may not be able to verbalize what they need. They may not feel worthy of asking for what they need. It's really attuning to that person and saying, how can I best be the support that that person is seeking or that's in their best interest right now? The second question that you asked, sorry, can you repeat that part?
Well, I appreciate you, first of all, saying that not to not just like push advice onto people. And the first part of this question was really like, what do you wish like somebody, if you going back, would have been helpful? So if somebody's struggling right now, what do you think would be a good starting point for them? And please feel free to share any resources that you think are helpful as well.
Yeah, I think what we were talking about here, the big thing is that community. There are so many different people that are speaking up now in their wherever they are located. I think what was detrimental to me and to other people who do this is so when I went and sought help, I went to a program within the institution that was designed to help residents and people that I think faculty, for sure residents, is supposed to help them. And the first things that they talked to me about is like how is it really important they're going to keep it a secret. It was all that stigma stuff, right? And so for me, the stigma is so unnecessary because it's more common that we're experiencing distress. So you put someone into a residency. These are humans. You take away their ability to keep up with their basic needs. It would be actually abnormal if they felt great, you know? And so you're like, oh, okay, you're having a very human response to the circumstances. But what do? We shame them rather than see, okay, this is what the brain was supposed to do. It's telling me I'm in threat. I'm not sleeping. I'm not eating. So I don't feel great. What was this depression telling me? This depression was telling me that the life I was leading right then, that high stress environment, the more stress that I was adding onto it from my intrapersonal types of conversations with myself, the self criticism, that was just adding to threats to my safety. My sirens were going off. So what do we tend to do? We suppress them. I was advised medication can be really helpful for people. And when it was offered to me without being asked, are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you questioning this career decision? None of that was discussed to me. And it was more, how are we keep this silent? And the conversations really fueled into my narrative that it was me, that I was a problem. So the culture has shifted that we're having more conversations out loud. You're leading the way on this. People, that we've met since I've shared my story. The way that I unburdened my own self was I wrote an article on Kevin MD because I actually thought I was going to die. And I'm like, I don't want to die with people thinking they're alone. So I was like, screw that stigma. Like, what is this stigma? The stigma is so ridiculous. It doesn't even ever make sense. So it's an outdated stigma, and we just need to respect our humanity. We need to come together, common humanity. That's why I love compassion and self-compassion. It's the kindness to self and others, being with the suffering, mindfulness to be in presence and being without judgment.
That is such beautiful advice. And you're right. Like the word that was coming to my mind here was impression management. When you said that, we focus our energy, especially in high pressure careers like medicine, on how to hide and disguise
Mhm,
versus like, oh, let's look at what the actual person, the help that they need, what is
mhm,
actually happening behind the scenes, and then staying with compassion. Self compassion has been one of the most important points in my personal healing journey too, and a
mhm,
hill that I keep going up and down as things happen in life. But I really want us to hold on to that point that you mentioned about disguising, because I when you said that, also with impression management came a lot of like personally, ever since I think this is more to do with the social cultural phenomena that I experienced with my own personal culture, and
mhm,
then amplified within the culture of medicine. It was like, well, yeah, you're suffering, but please make sure nobody finds out.
uh-huh,
Let's just keep it under wraps. And I say this because I lied on my personal like depression screenings. I lied on everything. And I really like when I was to my lowest points and having thoughts of harming myself, I went so quiet. I went
mhm,
so quiet and I made sure that I looked flawless. Like it is
mhm,
so sad. And my pictures from that time frame, first of all, like there came a time I stopped taking pictures because I just felt like I couldn't. And then the times that I did take pictures, they were ultra curated. Like it is so painful. And I've
mhm,
blocked out those moments from my memory and from my time, like a time that was so wonderful to become a mother, to go through that experience. Like I just completely block that out. And as you share this, this is how I identify. And for anybody listening, yeah, it's not about let's just cover it up. Instead, let's just focus on how we can help. And yeah, self-compassion was completely inaccessible to me in those moments at that.
Yeah. Yeah, and how different would it have been if someone's like, "Yeah, if this is what I experienced, it sounds very similar," and you were able to see yourself in other people's stories and to be known that, "Hey, this isn't a problem with you. This is an experience that many people face," and to have a supportive community around you. If you were to be able to tell your honest symptoms and to be met with trying to figure out, "Okay, what does Amna need right now?" How would that have changed your life in those times?
I probably would have a lot more color and joy and memories, you know. I love that you're asking that very, very powerful question. Jillian, I'm going to shift gears a little bit now. We're talking about navigating this journey that you've been in, right? And
Mhm.
we're learning so much by you sharing. So, and the podcast is about redefining success. It's a
Mhm.
loaded word that everybody identifies with in a very different way. So, if I was to ask you, how have you reimagined success for yourself?
Well, the success, when I almost died a few times and realized that our achievements weren't there to save us, I was like, "Oh, what did I give up in order to be there?" I gave up my relationships with people. I gave up just being in life. So when I think about success and what feels so fulfilling to me, and I think about the roles that I have, I want to be able, to enter someone's life and that their life is better for that interaction. So sometimes when I'm overtired, I'm stressed out, I'm hyper focused on my achievements, I can be irritable. And then I'm like, oh, right. I run into somebody and like that probably made their day worse, not the way I want to show up. The way I would say a successful day is I was present with that person. I attuned with that person. I listened to that person feels like I was there. I heard them. They felt connected to me and that our interaction at least helped them to feel safe. Worse, my goal would be that that day was a little bit better because we were able to engage. I want to leave this world a little bit better off than we come into it or the environments that we have, not on some grandiose scale, but just in the micro moments that we have each day. And one of the key drivers, I think, when I lose meaning and purpose in my life, I focus on my dog Reese. I said, all right, well, on a micro scale, the success means that my dog had the best day ever over and over and over again. Okay, what does that mean? Well, based off of Reese's standards, I know the things that he enjoys. I can tell his body language when he's having a good day and he feels fulfilled. So, success for me, things that we came up today, perfectionism, it makes you masks, makes you who you're not. So success for me means aligning with my true self, living alignment with my integrity, which we can tell in our body and in our mind. And when I feel that peace and I feel like I'm being honest with myself and presenting myself in an authentic way, that's when I feel like I'm on the path that is most fulfilling. And that feels like success to me.
Well, you are such a light to everyone in your life, and anything you touch, you bring compassion and hope and joy to. So I really appreciate you taking us on this journey and sharing your very raw experiences, right? I know that so many in the audience will be able to learn and be better members in the community. So the ripple effect, it goes far. How can my audience learn more about your amazing work and connect with you?
Well, I'm tending to be on LinkedIn more, so you can be there. And I do have a YouTube channel. We'll just put it under my name, Jillian Rigert, and can hopefully connect there. Otherwise, you'll probably see me out in the wild if you live in the Texas, Houston area. That might be harder though.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing everything with us, Jillian.
Thank you so much, Amna. I really appreciate you being a witness to my story.
You might believe you don't have the time or energy to focus on yourself, but this is exactly the right time to get serious about your well-being. You don't have to do it all alone. I'm here to help. If you enjoyed this video and are ready to take the next step, head over to dramnashabir.com where you'll find free resources you can access right away. The website link is below. Let's get started on your path to thriving.